All right, let's dive into two of the most talked about and honestly, most confusing concepts in biblical prophecy, the rapture and the second coming. We're going to break down what they are, how they're different, and really, why any of it matters. Let's get into it.
So yeah, what is the difference, really? If you've ever found yourself scratching your head trying to keep these two events straight, you are definitely not alone. The main thing to get from our sources is that while they are connected, they are absolutely not the same thing.
Now get this for a starting point. The New Testament actually mentions Jesus' return over 300 times. But here's the kicker. The source material explains that this return happens in two totally separate phases. And understanding that, well, that's the key to unlocking this whole topic.
Okay, so let's put these two events side by side. I think that's the best way to get a really crystal clear picture of what each one is all about. First up, the rapture. The definition we're working with is this. It's the moment when all believers are caught up from the earth. And the most important detail here is the location. This meeting happens in the air, not on the ground. Now let's contrast that with the second coming. This is the big, public, everyone sees it, return of Christ to the earth. And the purpose is completely different, right? It's about judgment and setting up a physical kingdom right here. So you've got to remember, public, earth, and rule.
This table just lays it all out perfectly. Look at this. Rapture in the air. Second coming on the earth. The rapture is described as secret, happening in the blink of an eye, while the second coming is a massive public event for all to see. And this last one is huge. At the rapture, Christ comes for his saints to take them out of here. But at the second coming, he comes back with his saints to rule. See the difference?
And if you're wondering where this rapture idea comes from, well, this verse in 1 Thessalonians is pretty foundational. It literally says believers will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. It's right there.
Now put that right next to this verse about the second coming. The difference is just stark. This isn't some secret meeting. It's a global spectacle where every eye will see him. It completely highlights that public nature we were just talking about. Okay, so how do these two events actually fit together in the grand scheme of things? Let's take a look at the bigger prophetic timeline that the source material lays out. So here's the sequence. It kicks off with the rapture, when the church is taken from the earth. Then, that's followed by the second coming, when Christ returns with all those believers. That return is what starts a period called the millennial kingdom, which is then followed by a final judgment, and finally, the creation of the new heavens and new earth.
And that millennial kingdom? It's not some vague symbolic idea. The texts describe it as a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ right here on earth.
During this 1,000-year period, the world is described as being totally transformed. Satan is bound, so you have universal peace. The curse that's been on creation is finally lifted. The nation of Israel is restored, and those believers who came back with Christ, they get to rule alongside him.
Now, we've got to clarify another key point, judgment, because there are two completely separate judgments described. First, believers face what's called the judgment seat of Christ. This happens after the rapture. It's not about salvation, that's already settled. It's about assessing their lives to determine rewards. Then, way later, after that 1,000-year millennium, unbelievers face the great white throne judgment, which is the final judgment based on their deeds. So a question that always comes up is, okay, are there signs, things we should be looking out for? Let's take a quick look at what the source material says will happen before the second coming.
Well, according to the Gospel of Matthew, the answer is yes, there are signs. Things like escalating global conflicts, natural disasters, an increase in persecution, and widespread deception. But, and this is important, the text is super clear that these are just the beginning of birth pains. They're indicators that the end is getting closer, not the end itself.
Look, this is all fascinating theological information, but what's the point? Let's get practical. How does knowing any of this, the timeline, the events, how does it actually make a difference in our lives right now?
It really all boils down to one central idea: living with hope. This whole thing isn't about getting scared or trying to predict dates on a calendar. It's about shaping a very specific attitude toward life. So what does that actually look like day to day? Well, it breaks down into about 4 things. First, living with a joyful anticipation, not with dread. Second, pursuing a pure and holy life because of this hope. Third, being motivated to share the gospel with others. And finally, strengthening our relationships with other believers so we can encourage each other.
Ultimately, the main takeaway is that this future hope has a present-day job to do. It's meant to be the motivation for us to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives right now, in this age, while we wait.
And that brings us to this foundational promise from the Gospel of John. Beyond all the timelines and the signs and the theology, this is the heart of the message. A personal promise of return, a promise of reunion. And I guess the question it leaves us with is, how does a promise like that change the way we see today?